Hey everybody, Brandon here from CAD Intentions, and in today's video we're taking a look at the top settings and customizations I make to every install of AutoCAD. We all know AutoCAD is a super powerful software with a ton of options and abilities, but that doesn't mean it's customized and set up perfectly for you right off the bat with the default settings. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at each of these settings I change every time I get a fresh install. These are going to make your life easier as well as speed up your overall drafting process and the software in general. And don't forget to stick around to the end where I'm going to share one of my favorite bonus tricks to speeding up AutoCAD, but let's jump right into today's video. Alright, so starting off here, we've got a pretty much blank and default install of AutoCAD with a few of my go-to tweaks already done, but we're going to walk through what those are, and I'm going to show you a ton of other settings and tweaks I make along the way and as needed. So to start off, we're going to type in the options command, and here is where you're going to be able to change and control a lot of how these settings and customization is going to work within AutoCAD. Now, a few of the things you're going to need to do are going to start from here right off the bat. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to your Open and Save tab here in the Options menu. Down here in the bottom left is where your file safety precautions, or what we would call Autosave Settings, are. Now, this should be the first thing that most people do, and this is where you're going to set up your autosaves. Just make sure that these are checked on, because they're going to save you a ton of time and headache in the future if you ever do have a crash with any of your drawings and lose what you've worked on. Now, the intervals are going to be more of a personal preference. By default, they're typically at 10 minutes. Many users will kind of up that to maybe 15 or 20, depending on what you're working on and how often you tend to have crashes. Having often saves is nice, but saving often with a big or kind of heavy-duty CAD file can be kind of time-consuming, and you're going to get this lag or freeze when it does the autosave, and having that every 10 minutes on a big file can actually be more detrimental than beneficial. So you're going to be able to set that setting to whatever you like. You can type it in. It's in minutes, so I've just changed it to 15. Now, leaving everything else here default will be fine. You do typically want to make note of what your file extension is for temporary files, but I'll also link a video down below where I go into depth on how to recover these autosave files and what you can do with them in AutoCAD, as well as how to recover your drawings that you may have lost or don't have an autosave for. That video is going to be super helpful. Alright, so next up, while we're already in our options menu, the second customization that I always change with every new install is going to dark mode. Now, I'm going to change it to light so you can see the difference, and I'll show you what the background looks like as well if it were ever changed back to light. So you can see already it's much brighter, and I find for any designers that work in the software for long periods, especially if this is your main career or job, you're going to get really tired of a bright white screen staring at you all day. So changing these to dark mode as well as a custom uniform darker background. I'm just using 36 as my color right now, but you can change it to anything. I typically recommend a gray or dark color or shade. This is going to save your eyes the most. So I go into these two settings. So again, that is the colors button here. Choose uniform background, and I'm going to change this. You can use the select color, and you can just drag this up and down. You can pick any color really, but I tend to be somewhere in this range here of like 35 to like 60 or 70 across the three RGB colors. This is going to give you the best mix of like a contrast from the other colors you're using, but it's also just going to be a lot easier on your eyes. And again, you're going to want to hit this drop down here and change to dark mode and hit apply. This is going to darken up the entire user interface and really save your eyes over the long term, and I just think it looks much better in general. Next up, since we're already in the display tab of the options window here, is the rollover and extended tool tips. These can be checked or unchecked from this box, and if you've used AutoCAD for any amount of time, you likely don't need the tooltips to be popping up for you all the time. So unchecking these is going to take away those tips. So if you're hovering over a command and a pop-up tip comes up, or you're hovering over some object and things are popping up like this, that's typically not very useful when you've been using the software for a while. So once you feel comfortable, I highly recommend just turning off all of these tips, since I don't need them and they tend to cause a little bit of a lag when they're happening and can actually get in the way if you're trying to click on something and it's popping up from another object to the left or right of where you're working. While we're also in this one here, this is how you're going to be able to change up and customize your crosshair size. So by default it's at 5. If you like the crosshair, that would be your cursor here, to be a little bit larger or a little bit smaller, that's where you're going to change that in the options menu. Many users like this a little bit larger or smaller depending on the type of work they're doing, whether you want things a little bit more precise or you just like the large cursor so you can line things up that are off screen or higher up and lower than what you're working on. Things in grid patterns like floor plans, this is super helpful. You can make sure just by looking pretty quickly if things are lined up with grid lines or walls and etc. So again, that can also be customized in that display tab. You can also look around here and see some of the other options that are available, but again, we're just going through the ones that I'll tend to change pretty quickly when I get a new install or recommend to junior drafters as they get a little bit more comfortable with the software. Customizing things to increase speed is a huge part of growing as a designer. Now, moving over to the user preferences tab here, there's a few things that I'll typically at least adjust or tweak as I'm using AutoCAD more and more. One of those is the right-click customization. So when you right-click in AutoCAD, you're going to get that shortcut menu. You can change how that interacts and the options available to you in this customization. Most notably, you can turn on time-sensitive right-click, which I do find is helpful sometimes. Basically, it allows a quick right-click, and that justifies or activates the enter or space command instead of the menu. If you hold the button down for a few seconds or milliseconds, depending on what you choose here, you're going to get the right-click contextual menu. So this is a great way to save time if you find yourself needing to right-click a lot. So you can see I just tapped it and it brought back my options windows as an enter or a space command rather than the right-click menu. So again, this is going to be more of a personal preference one, but it's one that I highly recommend trying out for speed. Having that extra button for your right-click rather than having to hit the enter all the time can be a bit of a time saver, especially if you're using it quite often. Alright, so once those settings are changed, that's about it that I change up right off the bat from the options dialog here. If you'd like, you can check out the selection tab. I know many users like to change up the grip size for objects that you select. So you can change the size of the square, but you can also change up the colors. Same goes for the selection effect color. You can change that up so when you select objects, it's kind of got that glowing blue. You can change that to another color. You can also change some of the settings for that as well in this tab. All of those are going to be pretty helpful, but more of a personal preference than an actual setting that's going to speed things up. That's just more how things look and less on actual fatigue or time savings. Now, next up is customizing kind of this bottom area here. I always change this up, and I also change up a few of the options right away because they just bother me. So I don't like dynamic inputs. You can see here when I start typing, the dialog box or the dynamic input box here pops up rather than down here and simply just being on the command line. This may be because I've been using the software for quite a while, but I typically just don't like things following my cursor around. I like them to just be consistent and in the command line. So you can turn that off by going down here to the bottom and clicking on and off the dynamic mode or dynamic input. You can also use the command dynmode to turn that on and off by using 1 or 2 or 1 or 0, but I'll simply uncheck that down here. So now you can see when I'm typing, it's only going into my command line and it's just not cluttering up my screen. I like to keep that clear as possible. Which goes into the next tip, and that is I almost always turn off selection cycling. So selection cycling is what happens when you select an object that is above or below another object. This selection cycling window pops up and it asks you which of the objects you meant to click. Now, I find this pretty redundant and more annoying in 90% of the use cases. And there are a few where it is helpful, and that's why you can turn it back on just as quickly by clicking this button. But I tend to be able to click the object I want pretty easily. If I have any areas where there are quite a few overlaps, I find that hovering over lets me select what I want just as easily because it's highlighting what's going to be selected when you click. So I never really find this function useful, and it just takes up some of that screen real estate. So it is one of the first ones that I turn off for increased speed and less lag. I find the less stuff popping up on the screen, the better, the smoother the software runs, and the less annoyed I am in the long run. Following along in that kind of path, by hitting the customization button in the bottom right of the status bar down here, you can turn on and off all of these quick select buttons. So things like turning on and off the selection cycling ability to see that down there, you can clear this all up by turning that off. Same for dynamic input. You can see I don't really use that, so I'll turn that one off. But things like coordinates I always use, so I like to have that down here. You can customize this bottom menu by turning these on and off simply by clicking them. And one more before we get off of this bottom status bar here, and that is customizing your O snaps or object snaps. Hitting this little down arrow here and just selecting which things and objects you'd like to snap and which criteria you'd like to use is one of the first things you're going to want to do when you start actually drawing within the software. Turning on endpoint, midpoint, and center are probably the default starting points, but then from there you can kind of be a little bit more picky depending on the type of drafting you're doing. Typically you're not going to need many of these, and you can always turn them on and off from down here or using one of the shortcuts, which I explain in some of the other videos. Now, before we move on to some of the other tips and the bonus at the end, I wanted to remind everybody to check out my AutoCAD Fundamentals and Workflows course. It's discounted for viewers such as yourself at the link down below and up above. I've packed it full of over 15 years of AutoCAD tips, tricks, workflows, and fundamentals. These are things that are going to help speed up your workflows, save you time, and make you comfortable creating professional drawings in a short time. Everything from building out custom templates and title blocks, adding a standard layer list, building blocks, creating sheets, XREFs, annotation, text and notes, annotative text, and more. I've learned a ton over my career, and I've shared it in a bunch of quick and easy to watch videos that you can get at that link up above and down below, discounted for you. I highly recommend checking it out, and I'd love to hear what you think. Alright, so another one that I will typically customize or set up right from the get-go is one that I just made a video about last week. So I'll link that down below and you can just check it in the playlists. But that is customizing my workspace within AutoCAD, and that basically involves everything you're looking at, mainly the tabs, the tool palettes, the property menus, just however I like things set up for the specific type of work I'm using it on or doing in it. You're going to save your current one as and create a new one with all of those things set up the way you like. This way you can quickly switch between workspaces and go from the default text and drafting one, or go back to your custom one, or switch to 3D and modeling. This is a quick way to save kind of the feel and look of all of your settings, but still be able to flip between multiple options if you're doing different types of work. You could have one set up for 3D modeling and then one for set up for 2D floor plans, and then another one set up for, say, civil plot plans. You're going to need different commands and settings for each, and this is a great way to have those saved within the software and quick to switch between. Alright, so next up is possibly one of my favorite commands to customize, and that is the File tab preview up here. So you can see when I hover over one of my drawings, it gives me this preview of all of the tabs within the drawing, like the layout and the model tab. But what I find is when I'm actually drafting quick and I have multiple drawings open here, I can accidentally hover over one of these and then accidentally click or activate it, and it can switch to another project or a drawing or another tab, completely messing up the flow. And if you have enough things open, or say you're doing a lot at once, it can sometimes freeze and crash the software. So to turn that off, you're simply going to type in File tab preview and hit enter, and change that to 0 and hit enter. So now you can see when I hover over here, I'm not going to get that tab render of the drawing. It's simply going to just give you the options, but I also find that this just doesn't come up as often, and I rarely ever click it. So you're going to want to change that one. It's File tab preview, and you can change that to 0. And you can also go to File tab thumb over and change that one to 0 as well. And that is going to just turn those off, and it's going to save you time, and it's also going to speed up AutoCAD because it's not having to render those and bring those up when you do hover over it. Now the last customization before we get to the bonus tip at the end is to use the system variable monitor. So the command for that is sys var monitor, or MON, and it's going to bring up a dialog box, and basically this is just going to enable AutoCAD to monitor the various variables that you have set and you prefer to stay the same. So this will make sense as we work through it here, but by checking this on, and I like to have the balloon notification checked on as well, you're going to be alerted if anything in AutoCAD changes when it comes to these system variables. And you can add or remove any from the list, and you can also choose which variable preferred option you need it to stay with. Now this really matters for things like file dialog, so if this gets changed, which it does sometimes, particularly if AutoCAD say crashes or you have an issue with a drawing, and then all of a sudden when you type in open or save, the dialog boxes don't pop up. And people ask me this all the time, what goes wrong and why this is happening, and it's because the variable has changed back to 0. Now this can go for that File tab preview. You could add that to the list. You can add any of the system variables within AutoCAD to the monitored system variable list. And all this is going to do is give you a pop-up or an alert when one changes, whether it's from a drawing setting or a crash or some other issue that may have changed it. Maybe you're switching profiles and they're set up differently. But this is a great way to kind of monitor what AutoCAD is doing in the background and just keep tabs on those system variables that you change and you like to keep in a specific way. You can change things like your zoom factor using the zoom factor variable, the file dialog one, or pick add or pick first, which is one that I like. It allows you to pick your objects and then enter a command. If this gets changed, it's not going to allow that to happen, forcing you to enter a command and then pick your objects, and it'll always deselect your objects if you have the command activated before them. So that's the settings and customizations that I make to AutoCAD every time I do a fresh install or advise new users to make as well. And lastly, before we go, I wanted to give you a cool bonus tip, and that is to type in the alias edit command. And that's going to allow you to edit any of the alias or short commands within AutoCAD. This is a great way to save you time, and I highly recommend customizing some of these to suit the type of work you do. If you find yourself never really drawing circles and you want C to be the copy command, it's as easy as finding the command in the list and changing the variable, and hitting apply. You can also add new ones with new aliases depending on if there are some hidden commands and you just want to make a quick 3-letter or 2-letter command alias for it. This is a huge game changer, and it's super simple to edit now within AutoCAD. This used to be an issue where you'd have to go into a text file and do some customization in there and then save it and make sure everything's linked. Now you can simply type in alias editor and get this dialog box to quickly change, and they're going to get saved and confirmed within your AutoCAD. These are going to stick around every time you open the software. So this is a great way to save time, customize your commands, and look like a pro in the office with all of the cool short commands that you've set up. That's all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching and got some useful information out of it. Again, if you haven't already, don't forget to check out my AutoCAD Fundamentals and Workflows course. It's packed full of tips and tricks that are definitely going to save you time, and it's discounted for you guys at that link up above and down below in the description. That's all for today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching. Cheers.